The mother of one child with Down syndrome said, "The purpose of most parenting is to build your children up, to tell them they can do anything." She said, "My job is constantly to say to my son, 'You're not smart enough to do that.'" Do you know how much I hate having to say that? Down syndrome presents a particularly striking set of ironies. In the 1950s, it was assumed that people with Down syndrome couldn't really develop meaningful language. In fact, that they would never really be able to do anything very much, and their life expectancy was very short. They mostly died by adolescence. There is no condition for which we have made more progress than we have for Down syndrome. People with Down syndrome are now living into their 60s and 70s. Early intervention has allowed people to develop skills that no one dreamed were possible. There's been this huge, huge advance, this huge leap forward, and Down syndrome is less and less consigning people to total dysfunction. But it does still consign people to serious disabilities and challenges. So the question is what to do with these people with Down syndrome and how to find a place within society for them. And it can be difficult. And because this process of helping people to function so much better is still in many ways in its early stages, it's not always clear how well people can do, how much they can do. Expectations are very confused. Some people who have Down syndrome are much more seriously disabled than others. I said to someone who works with kids with DS, I said, "But why do some people with DS seem to function so much better than others?" And she said, "Why do some people without DS function so much better than others?" And there's a lot of truth in that, but it's also the case that some people seem to be more severely afflicted with some of the most difficult aspects of Down syndrome. So the irony is that people with Down syndrome are functioning better and living longer and achieving more than anyone ever dreamed possible. And at the same time, Down syndrome is one of the things that is standardly being screened for in prenatal screening, and more parents are choosing to terminate pregnancies with fetuses who will have Down syndrome. And it's a complicated question. I don't think anyone should be pressured into carrying through a pregnancy that she doesn't want to carry through. However, it's sad to think that we're doing so well with kids with Down syndrome, and at the same time we're making these medical advances that are ultimately going to limit the number of Down syndrome births. And there's been so much progress with people with Down syndrome, but funding for progress is contingent on population. So if the population of people with Down syndrome begins to dwindle, a lot of the progress will be stalled. And that would be too bad. Too bad, especially because while people with some of the other conditions I've chronicled really seem to be talking themselves into finding worth and meaning in them, pretty much all the families I met of children with Down syndrome talked about the sweetness, the affectionateness, the engagement that they had with those children. One of the people I interviewed who's worked with families who have just received a diagnosis said the relationship to the diagnosis is completely different from the relationship to an actual child they'll almost always end up loving.